Welcome to the Authority File, the academic library podcast from Choice. Choice is a publishing division of the ACRL and the publisher of Choice Reviews and CC Advisor. This episode is brought to you by Annual Reviews. I'm Bill Mickey, the host of the podcast and the editorial director at Choice, and for this 4-episode series, I'm joined by Richard Gallagher, the president and editor-in-chief of Annual Reviews, a nonprofit scientific publisher with a unique content model that's about to get a whole lot more interesting. But before I introduce the first episode, I'd like to ask you, our listeners, for a little help. We've created a survey about our podcast, and I'd like to invite you to fill it out. Your answers will help us understand what you like about the Authority File, what you don't, and about your opinions in podcasts in general, and what you think we can do to improve the Authority File. I'll bet it only takes you about 10 minutes to fill out, and if you want, you can enter to win a $25 Amazon gift card. You can access the survey at www.research.net/r/authorityfile. That's www.research.net/r/authorityfile. Okay, so on to our first episode. Richard Gallagher and I start off by talking about Annual Reviews' content model. Annual Reviews is a nonprofit publisher that collects and synthesizes research from the past year, summarizing it and contextualizing it in a collection of articles that are published in 50 journals dedicated to specific areas of study: marine science, psychology, and public health, for example. The content for each of the articles is selected and planned with the help of editorial committees. Richard walks us through that process and begins to discuss the company's recent efforts to transform its subscriber-only model into a unique open access model. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how Annual Reviews got started. We can dig into a little bit of the history of the organization. Richard, why don't you update us on how Annual Reviews came to be?
Well, Annual Reviews originated in 1930 with J. Murray Luck, who was a biochemist at Stanford University. Luck felt overwhelmed by the volume of literature that he needed to read for his research and teaching, so he wrote to 50 biochemists proposing a volume of critical review articles covering the field. The responses that he got back were positive. Actually, we have some of that correspondence in our archives. And Luck and 3 other local biochemists commissioned the first volume of the Annual Review of Biochemistry, which was published in 1932. They actually set up a company, a non-profit company at that time, called Annual Review of Biochemistry Limited. And the first 3 volumes were subsidized by a payment from the organization called the Chemical Foundation. Then, in anticipation of the launch of a second annual review in 1939, which was the Annual Review of Physiology, they changed the name to Annual Reviews Inc., which is still our name today. Despite that Inc., we are an independent non-profit organization.
Right, still non-profit.
In 1947, Annual Review of Microbiology was launched, and Physical Chemistry, Psychology, and Plant Physiology appeared in 1950. So new titles have been added in fits and starts over the last 70 years, and we'll get to the 51st Annual Reviews Journal, which is in developmental psychology later this year.
Excellent. Tell us a little bit about the founder. What was he like?
So Murray Luck was really quite a fascinating individual. He was born in Ontario, Canada in 1899, son of a blacksmith, and he won a scholarship to study at the University of Toronto, went on to the University of Cambridge, and began his career in Stanford University in 1926. By the time of his death in 1993, he was the longest serving faculty member there. He published more than 200 research papers in biochemistry with a major interest in the role of proteins in carcinogenesis. But he was also the leading English language historian of Switzerland, and he served as the science attaché at the US Embassy there for a period. He wrote several books, including War on Malnutrition and Poverty, which was published in 1945, and the extraordinarily titled History of Switzerland, the first 100,000 years, which was published in 1945, and you can still get that on Amazon today. He
Wow.
spoke fluent Russian. He founded the Palo Alto Food Co-op, and every year he published an article in the local press on the cost of a balanced diet. One further final item, Luck's portrait hangs in the annual review's office, and some of the staff swear that his eyes swivel to follow them around the office. They're probably the ones that grew
All
up
right.
watching Scooby-Doo cartoons.
Right, exactly. All right, that sounds like a fascinating guy.
Yeah.
So as the company progressed through the decades, I mean, have the number of journals that it's published along the way, has that ramped up as the company got older, or in more contemporary times, or is there kind of a sort of progression in terms of when a new journal is introduced?
Well, it seems to have happened in fits and starts, and it's
Yeah,
driven by the perceived need of research communities rather than by any kind of financial incentives to,
right.
become more profitable or something like that. So we've not looked to go after huge, big areas of science, but rather to make sure that different scientific communities feel that they have their own annual reviews to work with.
Okay. So let's dissect for our listeners what a review actually is, and how they're used in the research community.
Well, I think of a review as a distillation and critical analysis of the literature on a particular topic.
Hmm.
Our reviews in particular serve four main purposes. Firstly, they capture the current understanding of a topic and separate out what's well supported and what remains controversial. Second, they set the work in historical context. Third, they highlight the major questions that remain to be addressed and therefore the likely course of research in upcoming years. And fourthly, they provide an outline of the practical applications and overall significance of research to society.
Okay. And I imagine they're not quite the same structure or framework format as they were back in the 30s, particularly in that they might not any longer encapsulate a full year's worth of research on a topic, but they're more topical now. Am I getting that right, or how's
That's
that?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I'd looked
Okay.
back at the very first article that was published in the annual review of biochemistry. It was on cell permeability, written
Hmm.
by Rudolf Huber from the University of Kiel, and he cited 42 references, 41 of which had been published either in 1930 or 1931.
Okay.
When you look more recently, by the 1970s, far more articles were being referenced, typically 2 to 300, and the reviews had become longer overviews of particular topics rather than, catalogues of a year's progress in science.
Hmm.
Over the years, adaptations of all kinds have been introduced, figures, professional illustrators to optimize those figures, sections that focused on next steps, so on and so forth. But I think that the basic format of the review article would still be recognizable to those authors from 1932.
Okay. How do those sort of incremental changes to those articles reflect what might be happening within the research community, or how they want to interact with this content? What are you reacting to, what their needs are, or are they sort of indicating to you guys what they might want to see?
Somewhat that, and somewhat what technological progress allows us to do. So obviously,
Right.
going on to the internet is the biggest single change. But being able to print in four color allowed us to introduce four color figures, and the realization that these figures are an important part of a review article encouraged us to bring in professional illustrators to work on them.
Hmm.
So it's partly driven by what's happening with other publishers, what innovations we see there, and we have very close relationships with our editors and authors, so we're always getting tips to follow on how to make things that little bit better.
Okay. So talk a little bit about how the articles are actually put together in terms of collecting all of the research that goes into them. This is done by an editorial committee, right?
Right,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
Each journal has an editor or a pair of co-editors who lead a committee that has 9 or 10 additional prominent researchers drawn from various subdisciplines in the field. It's, we think of the annual reviews as essentially their journals, and we on the annual reviews staff are in place to provide publishing services to them to make possible what they want to do. So this group of editors, they scour the literature throughout the year, they attend seminars, they canvass colleagues, and they pool their suggestions in a database. Then they get together in person to hammer out the topics and authors for the following year's volume. And I often hear that from members of the committee that it's the most interesting and enjoyable day of their work here. They do consider external proposals, but to write for an annual reviews volume, you must be invited by the relevant committee.
Okay.
That puts an onus on them and on us to achieve broad diversity in the committees and amongst the authorship, and that's something that we're really striving to achieve these days.
Right. That's good. And so they'll all gather and kind of do they sort of vote on the content on what gets included, or how do the selections actually get made?
Well, there, as I say, the journals are really the committee's responsibility, and that there are as many ways of selecting the topics as there are editors of the journals. Some of them will, everybody gets to discuss their first pick, and then it
Yep.
goes round the table, and then they go round for as many times as we need articles. Sometimes they'll just everyone will put all their topics in one particular theme into the mix and see who they what rises to the top. There's generally speaking, it doesn't come down to well, we've each got 5 votes. Where are we going to cast it? They try to thrash out an agreement within the group.
Okay. And then you'll collect all of those articles that are chosen into a single journal volume, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
So typically we'll have 25 to 35 articles in each volume, and we make the articles available online as soon as they're ready as reviews in advance, and then we publish the definitive version of each article when the entire volume is ready.
Okay.
About 2/3 of our titles we publish in print and online, and the other third, generally the newer titles, are online only.
Okay. I think you touched on this a little bit earlier, but you're you guys introduce a new journal when a field reaches sort of critical mass. I'm wondering if you can talk about a little bit more about that benchmark, and when you feel like it's time to introduce a new journal, or when a particular field can accommodate that journal.
Sure. Well, we regularly receive suggestions for new titles, and for these suggestions, we first of all assess the size and the trajectory of the field, and also where and how we cover the subject within our existing titles.
Mm-hmm.
And then we do extensive interviewing, just as Murray Luck did in 1930. Topics that kind of jump all these hurdles are presented to the board of directors as potentially new titles. We obviously want to make sure that there's a sufficient subscriber base to support any new title, but meeting the needs of the research community is our real priority.
Mm-hmm.
To give examples, the 3 most recent titles are Biomedical Data Science, Control Robotics and Autonomous Systems, and Criminology, all of which are, flourishing and fascinating fields. And the next one is the same. It's in developmental psychology, and it will launch later this year.
Okay. So one of the things we're going to get into in our episodes with you guys is sort of your transition, your new strategic direction into open access, and one of the things I kind of want to ask you early on in our conversation is that you're more or less operating as other scientific publishers are, minus, I suppose, the profits, since you are a nonprofit. Your content is subscriber only. It's behind a paywall, and it now looks you're evolving from a mission of supporting the research community to supporting an even broader social good by making your content available to other professionals and the general public as well. Is that sort of a fair characterization? And talk a little bit about why you're making that shift.
That is a fair characterization. We're trying to expand the reach and the value of our content, and it's really the result of both a push and a pull. The push is from the open access movement. As an organization that's run for researchers and by researchers, Annual Reviews is very aware of the support for removing barriers to access for all science publications, and we want to participate in that. Yeah. The pull essentially comes from our mission. We believe that a functional democracy requires that citizens have access to the knowledge and wisdom of the world's leading researchers, and Annual Reviews can provide this on many issues that society is grappling with today. Think of climate change or aging or mental health, food and water security, crime and justice. Making the Annual Reviews articles on these topics freely available would be a powerful public benefit, and so we're experimenting with ways to make this shift a reality.
You just heard from Richard Gallagher, President and Editor-in-Chief of Annual Reviews. This concludes the first of our 4-part series on Annual Reviews and its shift to an open access publishing model. This episode was brought to you by Annual Reviews. Be sure to join us for the next episode, where we'll talk more about the company's first steps towards open access and discuss the impact a shift to OA has on a publisher, including the long-term financial realities.
The Robert Wood Johnson Foundation provided us with the funds to publish the 2017 volume Open Access, and at the same time we made the back volumes freely available, and it was an experiment that was conducted with the full support of the editorial committee and the
Don't forget to fill out our new listener survey, which will help us understand what you like about the Authority File, what you don't like about it, and what you think we can do to improve it. Access the survey at www.research.net/r/authorityfile. That's www.research.net/r/authorityfile. You can find all of the episodes of the Authority File on your favorite podcast app or on our website, choice360.org. Just click on the librarianship dropdown. On choice360.org, you'll also find information on Choice's entire product platform, including Choice Reviews, CC Advisor, Choice Webinars, resources for college libraries, our white papers, and a whole lot more. A great way to keep up with the Authority File is to join the Choice Authority File Facebook group, which you can access via the Choice Reviews Facebook page. As a member of the group, you can give us feedback, suggest podcast participants, chat with other listeners, and submit new topic ideas. Sponsorship and advertising for the Authority File podcast are handled by Choice's advertising manager, Pam Marino, and the production and editing are done by Choice's digital media specialist, Mark Dirks. That's all for this week. Thanks for joining us.